I'm going to give you a bit of an interesting fact about shelled reptiles, tortoises and turtles and terrapins. We're going to talk about a tortoise here. This is one that has died of natural causes out in the bush, and you can actually see that the typical covering scales, as people call them, that you see on these tortoises are starting to fall off because it's been out in the bush for a while now and it's quite dry, and you can actually see they're starting to come off. And the interesting thing is that they're actually covering the actual shell itself. Now the shell, if you have a look at it, is made up of individual bone pieces or plates, like a jigsaw puzzle that comes together. And these are essentially, if you're looking at it in skeletal terms, it's basically modifications of the ribs, which have basically flattened and become blocks. And the rib cage itself is now the entire shell. We've got the carapace at the top. At the bottom, we've got the plastron. You can actually see it over there. Some of the leg bones are still present, and then we've got the bridge between the two over here, which joins them up. So essentially, if you're having a look at the frontal section, if you're looking at a human skeleton, for example, easiest way to think about it is this would be sort of the sternum area, which is sort of elongated and widened out. It's the ventral surface, and then of course you've got the ribs at the back flattened to form the carapace. Now, I don't know if you can actually see inside the shell here. It's probably a bit difficult, but you can actually see there's part of the spine inside over there. That's part of the neck, and the actual vertebra are fused all the way along. I don't know if you can see inside there. They're fused all the way along the inside of the shell. So it basically means that the tortoise, the terrapin, the turtle is largely immobile. It doesn't have a lot of flexibility of movement. The interesting thing about this, though, is this is effectively the rib cage, as I said. So we have our organs protected by our ribs, and so do they. But at the end of the day, they also need to protect themselves. So over time, what they've done is, in order to safeguard themselves against predators, because they don't move very quickly, is to pull their head and their legs inside this rib cage. Now that has required a physiological anatomical shift. You've got the shoulder blades, the collarbones, the entire hip area has actually moved to inside of this rib cage, which allows them to basically pull the body parts in. So that makes them quite different to other vertebrate animals. Then, of course, we've got the interesting thing with the covering. You know, if it was just bone like this, it would, of course, be exposed to bacteria, germs, the elements. It would not be, it would be career limiting, put it that way. It wouldn't allow them to survive very long. So the rest of the body, which is covered in a thick, scaly skin, basically that skin is modified into these plates which cover the shell, and they're called scutes. And you can actually see them quite nicely. And these scutes have got these markings on them. Some are smooth, some are ridged. It depends on the species. Some old individuals, the ridges wear away. Now, it's commonly said that, like growth rings on a tree, you can age a shelled reptile by counting the rings, and that's not quite true in every respect. Certainly the ridges, these rings that you're seeing, the oldest part is actually the central part of the scute. I don't have one of these top scutes here, but it would be the central part. It's usually quite smooth. If you see a big scute on the back, it'll be the small little part in the middle. That was from when they hatched out of the egg. And then this is actually it is a skin layer, like I said. So it's got a blood and nerve supply. So a lot of people also believe that when you touch a tortoise or you bang it around like this, which you shouldn't do, that they don't actually feel it, but they certainly do. They're quite sensitive to touch. And you know, if they get injured, scutes get ripped off, they get exposed to fire, it obviously will kill them. So, you know, these scutes, when they're growing, there's new layers, keratinized layers, that are being deposited from the bottom and then outwards. So the oldest part is in the middle, and then you effectively, as the shell is growing, you get little layers being added to the outside, and it's these so-called rings that you see. Now, the rings are actually laid down in growth spurts, so it doesn't necessarily correspond to an exact year. It's actually depends on the species, it depends on the age, it also depends on the latitude, the environment in which they find themselves, how long they can actually remain active. These guys would obviously be vegetarian, so if we've got just think of it in higher latitudes, away from the equator, we've got a very well defined summer and winter and a very cold winter, you'll find that you'll have sort of a short summer, single growth spurt, and then you will have a period of inactivity where you'll end up with these little ridges and troughs in the growth rings. Now, in areas closer to the tropics, or in the tropics closer to the equator, you might find that there's pretty much consistent growth through the year, which or 3 or 4 different seasonal bursts through the year, which allow them to lay down 3 or 4 different rings in a particular season or a year. So it actually blurs the lines between age and rings, but certainly if you can get consistency within a population and you can calibrate it to figure out exactly, you know, how the particular species in that given area is laying down rings, it could potentially become an accurate way of measuring age. You can actually see how the scoots at the back here are still intact and sort of covering the area of the tail and the genital area.